Okay, so it looks like we're good to go.
Thank you very much. I think we're just waiting for Mayor Martin. We'll just give him 30 seconds. Again.
I'm here.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Perfect. All right. Thank you, everyone. I will call the June 1st, 2020 Committee of the Whole meeting to order at 18:30 on the button, and acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Coast Salish people. Now, I do see Councillors Baxter, Day, Jansen, Kobayashi, Parkinson, and Mayor Martin are all present. So we will move to the approval of the agenda. I'm looking for a motion that the near-term and long-term agendas be received, and that the agendas of the June 1st Committee of the Whole meeting be adopted as presented. And moved by Councillor Jansen. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those opposed? Seeing none, the motion passes. Thank you. We have one set of minutes from May the 4th. I'm looking for a motion to adopt as presented. Moved by Councillor Kobayashi. Any discussion? I'm just going to close the minute. No. Seeing no discussion. Those that are opposed? Seeing none opposed, the motion passes. I understand that there's two members of the public that have registered to speak. And so Selena.
Thank you, Chair Logan. At this time, the two members of the public have not dialed in. I do have an individual in the waiting room, so if you could just give me a moment, I'm going to check and see who that is.
Oh, okay.
And they just disappeared from the waiting room, so we don't have to do that. So at this point, we do not have anyone who has dialed in. I will monitor the waiting room, and if they come on, I will put my hand up as we go through.
That was Marie B, and I had actually admitted her just as you said, hold on a minute.
Okay. So somebody has just entered the meeting as a Marie B. Are you able to identify yourself? Okay.
Okay.
I unfortunately do not know who that is. We have received everybody that we were expecting, with the exception of two individuals from the Royal Bay Homeowners Association who have not yet dialed in. So if you want to proceed, I will monitor, and if they come in, I will put my hand up.
Thank you. And I will note that one written submission was received from the Royal Bay Homeowners Association today, and it's been attached to the agenda. So we will move right along then to 5.1, rezoning RZ 20-002 Meaford at VNP. I'd like to invite Carrie Clark, planner, to introduce the item. Carrie.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can, yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen here. Sure. Okay. Are you able to see my screen right now?
Not yet, no.
No? Okay. It seems to be asking for some privacy options.
Carrie, if you're having issues sharing your screen, I think we've all got the presentation. So if you just wanted to walk through that, if you're able to see it on your end.
Sure. I think there's a privacy thing that I'm trying to figure out.
Hi, Carrie. I could probably bring it up. It won't be a PowerPoint, but you could ask me to move through the slides. I'll bring it up just a moment, okay?
That would be great. Thank you.
Now's the time, if anyone's a comedian, tell us an appropriate joke. Lots of smiles, but bunch of jokers, but
My jokes are not appropriate.
Through the chair, I might be able to pull it up a little bit faster if that's, Amanda, if that would help you out.
Sure, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm in the office and I'll just see if I can get to it. Just give me a second, and then Amanda, you please cut in if you think that you're getting it faster. Not. Oh, she's got it. Thanks, Amanda.
Aha, perfect. Thank you. All right, so I will get started here. This is a rezoning and OCP amendment for a parcel of land located at Mayford Avenue. The applicants, Jim Hartshorn and Niall Paultiel, join us tonight along with their consultant, Nadine King from Watt Consulting, and will be available for questions. Next slide, please. This slide shows the subject property located to the west of Veterans Memorial Parkway and south of Mayford Avenue. This is the only parcel located west of VMP, north of Kelly Road within the city of Colwood. So the lands to the north and the west are within the city of Langford. Next slide. The proposal is to amend the official community plan land use designation from Colwood Corners to mixed-use employment center with a site-specific maximum height of 12 stories, and to rezone the subject property from rural residential 1 A1 zone to a comprehensive development zone. The objective is to permit a mixed-use residential and commercial light industrial development with an automobile dealership on both the City of Colwood and City of Langford lands. The property includes 2 parcels located to the east of VMP, but only the subject property portion will be rezoned. The image shows the extent of the Langford portion of the development, and the Colwood portion makes up approximately 20%. Next slide. This slide shows the proposed land use regulations. The proposed zoning is based on the City of Langford proposal for a mixed-use employment center. The site coverage and setbacks mirror the Langford proposal. At a FAR of 6 is proposed. This is greater than permitted within the Colwood Corners land use designation. However, the mixed-use employment center is silent on maximum FAR. So the committee may wish to consider the FAR as proposed by Langford. The applicant is proposing 12 stories with density bonusing, which would complement the building heights on the Langford proportion of the development. Next slide. The image on this slide shows the OCP land use designation. The subject property is within Colwood Corners, but located on the opposite side of Royal Colwood Golf Course from the Colwood Corners. This is a remnant land use from when City of Langford and City of Colwood shared an OCP and was intended to support the Langford City Centre. So the proposal is to change the land use to the mixed-use employment center, and it will support an automobile dealership use that is not supported within the Colwood Corners land use designation. A site-specific height increase to 12 stories is required within the mixed-use employment center. However, 15 stories is currently permitted, so the request is more administrative in nature and would not apply to any other property. Development of the property will need to be enabled by a development permit application for a riparian, environmental DP, as well as a form and character DP. Next slide, please. So Colwood has an amenity or a community amenity contribution and attainable housing policy, which are intended to collect funds at the time of rezoning to fund future growth in the city. This slide shows the amounts typically collected by unit type as per the policy. It should be noted that there is no contribution for affordable housing associated with apartment units. The attainable housing policy required for every 10 units, 1 unit to be within a housing agreement with the city. This policy has been proven to be difficult to apply, so typically in its place, the city collects funds or secures a rental agreement for any rental housing units proposed. The policies do not consider contributions for commercial or business areas. So with regard to the Mayford application, staff have worked with the applicant to encourage the development of a building on the Colwood lands, as shown on Appendix 3 of the staff report. The density bonusing proposal is based on a 60-unit, 6-story building and mirrors the Langford proposal with a lump sum request of $90,000 at the time of rezoning. This number is based on a $1,500 per unit as per the community amenity contribution policy multiplied by 60 units. To accommodate the height above 6 stories as density bonusing, the developer has agreed to contribute $1,500 per unit above 6 stories at the time of building permit. The City of Langford's amenity package is summarized in the Langford staff report attached in Appendix 2 and specifically outlined on page 8 of the report. A $1 million lump sum over 4 installments is proposed to be contributed to the General Amenity Fund. This equates to approximately $1,950 per unit for 515 units on the lands. The rationale for a lump sum contribution is based on not knowing how the site will develop. The amenity package also includes in excess of 515 units. The developer will pay $712.50 per unit to the General Amenity Fund. And for every unit, the developer will pay $750 to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and is entitled to a 50 to 75% reduction depending on the use and height for units above the 4th story. As well, the developer will pay contributions for commercial business area and business area. Langford's amenity contributions are based on a policy amended and adopted in 2018. The City of Colwood has not revised the amenity policies since 2009. Although not part of the staff recommendation for this application, a second option to review and update the community amenity contributions and attainable housing policies has been provided if committee wishes to explore an update. Next slide, please. So at this time, it has been determined that the site can be adequately serviced. A transportation impact assessment was carried out with review by the Ministry of Transportation, Langford and Colwood. Sewer servicing options have been explored. One would be the extension of the City of Colwood system. However, it is located on the east side of Veterans Memorial Parkway. So it is recommended that the development pay 100% of the cost of extension, construction, and installation above the sewer servicing bylaw. The second option is to explore an intermunicipal agreement with the City of Langford, whereby the city's sewer provider would service any building on the City of Colwood lands. It is also recommended that an engineer's report on stormwater management be provided prior to second reading. The report will describe the stormwater system for the development. And it is recommended that if the culvert under Veterans Memorial Parkway is used, then engineering design and additional flow requirements are included within a development agreement. And this would need to be sensitive to Colwood Creek and the riparian development permit area. Frontage works are required by bylaw and to be included within the development agreement is outlined on this slide. Next slide, please. So this development proposal will support development of several parcels of land, including the City of Colwood parcel that is currently vacant. It will increase property value and tax base with potential for increase in housing supply within the City of Colwood. It also supports an economic hub with a mix of commercial, light industrial, and residential uses. And amenity bonusing is proposed to support increased density, and the site may be adequately served with the existing network. Next slide, please. A notification sign has been posted on the subject property as per council policy. As of the writing of the staff report, there have been no inquiries about this application. Prior to public hearing, notification will be provided to properties within 75 meters. Next slide, please. This slide provides a summary of the staff recommendation to amend the OCP with a site-specific maximum height of 12 stories, to amend the land use bylaw with density bonusing, submission of an engineer's report prior to second reading for stormwater management, permission of intermunicipal agreement discussion for sewer servicing with the City of Langford, as well as development agreement conditions that include payment of a lump sum bonusing provision of $90,000, engineered stormwater design, sewer servicing and stormwater management, as well as fire and life safety requirements. Next slide, please. This slide provides the options. So option 1 is the staff recommendation. Option 2 is the staff recommendation and an addition for staff to review and update the community amenity contribution and attainable housing policies and return with a report in fall of 2020, or that the application be deferred for further information or the application be denied. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Carrie. Appreciate that. And the applicant is in the rooms and available for questions. So I will open it up to committee. Councillor Jansen.
Wow, I didn't think I'd be first. First off, I'm happy to move the suggested recommendation to get the discussion started.
Okay. Thank you. So we have the recommendation is moved. Do you wish to motivate Councillor
Yeah,
Jansen?
just a couple of, well, really, I just have a couple of questions. One of the primary questions I have is, my understanding is the site plan is not finalized as of yet. So in essence, the proposed tall building out at the corner could be partially in our community or not at all in our community. And I'd love to hear from the planning staff what that means for the community amenity contributions. I mean, we are upzoning this at their request. And I'm just wondering if this doesn't touch our community at all. Do we see any of that money other than the 90K?
Thank you, Dean. I see Mr. Molnar has his hand up. Brent.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, the intention of the request, especially that it's been essentially paid within 180 days of the consideration of council or building permit, whichever came first, is attempting to get in front of that very question. The developer does have a right of choice on locating a building there or not. It is possible that they elect otherwise. And that's why we're saying this is almost an encouragement statement saying, well, then please pay us 60 units worth of the value in advance, even if it advances the building permit, and that will bring a credit forward for your first 60 units of the built form when you choose to build in Colwood. We hope that the proponent will choose to build in Colwood because they'll have had a payment already paid to us, essentially. Hope that answers the question.
That does, thanks. And just one further question. I'm not sure who best to answer, but it's not quite clear to me. Is there access off of the Parkway? And what does that look like? And as far as the engineering behind that, probably Brent, I guess.
Yeah, thank you very much. Through the chair, there has been access considered from the Parkway. That portion of Veterans Memorial Parkway is completely under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Transportation and Highways. So it's gone under a separate approval process with them. However, the city has read and reviewed the terms of reference and the traffic studies, which has been generated at to predicate that request and consideration from the Ministry of Transportation and Highways. And we believe we've received no formal communication from the ministry at this point in time. We believe that they're accepting of the proposal for right in off of the Parkway, but that is all they're accepting in from our knowledge right now.
Perfect. And one final thought. I see there's much discussion about shared services with Langford. I didn't see anything in the application about thought given to fire services. So if the property line runs down the middle, I mean, I know we have all sorts of agreements nowadays, but any thoughts, Brent?
You're exactly right. I see that Chief Cassidy is on the call as well, and he might be best to respond to the mutual response factor of it. However, water service will be from the best enabled area in F in this building, and all intent will meet FUS. And John, please add if you've got anything to add, please.
Chief.
Yes, in response to, through the chair, in response to Councillor Jansen. Yeah, fire protection for this development, if there's development within Colwood and also within Langford, given its proximity to the border, it would be mutual aid buildings due to its size and occupancy, and perhaps even auto-aided as we move forward in the planning stages if this goes forward. So fire protection is not a problem. In regards to FUS and water supplies, that would be calculated because it's required under our bylaw as well as the CRD bylaw. So if there was any water supply issues or concerns, it would be addressed during the planning phase. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, great. And just one other thought. I take it are our bylaws as far as sprinklers and firefighting capability, with regard to these buildings, are they all exactly similar, or could they be dealing with competing bylaw issues?
Through the chair, due to the proposed height of the proposal, it would be definitely strictly out of Part 3 of the BC Building Code, and that standard is province-wide. So any local bylaws that we would have would not take into effect in that regard for sprinklers or things like that. It would be the direct requirements of the provincial regulations.
Thanks, Brent, Chief, and Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dean. I'll go to Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, for prompting my unmuting earlier. I just have one question, and this is probably for Brent, and it revolves around stormwater. So if stormwater goes under the highway in the culvert, then it's headed for Colwood Creek, and Colwood Creek has a history of flooding. So I'm interested in the requirement which says that after development, the amount of storm water draining from the lands will not increase, and the storm water draining from the lands will not be a materially different quality. So as I see it, the problem with that is different amounts of stormwater flow off the site in different storms. And so to me, that's a bit vague. I know that it's perhaps impossible to construct a system that precisely mimics the size of storm that used to come off the site for any given storm, because it would have to, be able to change shape, or you would have to have a large number of culverts of different sizes, which mimic that difference in flow. So I wonder if Mr. Molnar could explain the intent in a bit more detail.
I certainly can, and through the chair, thanks very much for the question, Michael Baxter. So this is something, Councillor Baxter, that came up early in the discussions with the intent to rezone the land. Staff on Colwood side couldn't necessarily see a way for the land to create the impervious layers that it was looking to do without contributing additional stormwater to the creek, because there is an existing culvert that flies under, or that carries underneath Veterans Memorial Parkway from that piece of land. The developer did some preliminary research onto it and found out that they can detain and create systems within the Langford portions and partly under the Colwood portions that would bring about the detention requirements, thereby leaving the existing culvert under Veterans Memorial Parkway as merely a minor overflow to perhaps takes equal to or slightly less than what the lands do. There'd be a variety of different cells that they could use. They could use a storm tech type of system. They could build a pond. They could do underground storage. We do not, though, the end answer to that is we do not have the stormwater management plan as yet vetted through by the developer. And we've been consistent with the developer to say that if there is any increase of the flow underneath and using the Colwood or the culvert that exists under Veterans Memorial Parkway, that we would be desirous of seeing improvements made to that portion of Colwood Creek that is located on the east side of Veterans Memorial Parkway, so that it could detain and deal with any additional flow volumes prior to it reaching the culvert that goes into the golf course lands. So I do not have the finite answer for you right now. We have not received the stormwater master plan. However, this site for the Colwood portion will be subject to a development permit, in which case that will certainly be the requirement of it. And we'll be able to further speak to it then.
Okay, thank you. So we would be able to understand what size of storm this is mimicking before we have to take a final vote on this rezoning, yes?
Certainly, we can ask the developer to accelerate that. I'm not quite sure of the level of stormwater management intent that they're at right now, because I think the site was intended to develop in segments. However, we could certainly propose it, and if committee wished to recommend that that be received prior to public hearing, we could certainly endeavor to work towards that.
Then I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion, adding that request that we receive details of how much water will be allowed to pass compared to what currently passes before public hearing.
Thank you. So we do have an amendment on the floor. Councillor Day and Parkinson, I'm just going to lower your hands and ask for discussion on the amendment, please. I'm not seeing any discussion on the amendment. Oh, Councillor Parkinson.
If I may, one of the intriguing parts of this site to me is probably the sewer. So let's ask for details on the stormwater and the sewer. If it's an intermunicipal agreement that's all tidied up, the bow around it, that's great. If it's coming into Colwood, that's fine too. I don't particularly care. I just think it would be nice to, if we're going to ask for tidying up of what's happening with the stormwater, we should ask for tidying up on what's going to happen with the sewer as well. So I guess that's an amendment to the amendment.
Well, let's hear what Brent has to say here. We'll see.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, Councillor Parkinson. We have asked Langford to consider on their portion as part of the rezoning consideration an intermunicipal agreement. That question goes off to their sanitary provider, which is West Shore Environmental Services. And at this time, we have not received that response. That's why included in the report is a consideration for the developer to take all costs to sewer the lands. It will be a costly connection, likely going into the CRD main or across Veterans Memorial Parkway. And that's why that's in there. We don't know the answer to that yet.
I'm understood. I guess the concern is, what's best for this site may not in fact be best for the long-term deal with the CRD sewer and where Colwood sewage gets in and doesn't get in. Again, I don't think this is an insurmountable or anything that can't get tidied up. It's probably a lot less work than the stormwater. So I just suggest we might as well have that information in front of us.
Thank you. Mayor Martin?
Thank you. Anytime we've had some motions in the past, and then after the fact, there's been some consequences to those motions where either developer or staff have reported back, and we've had to look at revising. So can I, on this motion, can I please have staff comments and also the developer? Is this going to delay the project? Are there any pitfalls to this motion from their standpoint?
Okay, how about I'll turn to the developer. Mr. Paultiel?
Hello, Mr. Chair, can you hear us?
We can, yep.
Okay, perfect. So as far as the stormwater management plan goes, to address that first through Councillor Baxter's question, in addition to the work that Mr. Molnar appropriately outlined with respect to the cells that will be created, because this land and all the land in Colwood that's part of this subject property is within a RAR or a riparian DP area, we not only will be providing cells for the purposes of stormwater management, but we're also providing open wetland swales that will run along the highway prior to any water exiting our property and going under the culvert towards Colwood Creek. So, you look at the land today, it's blackberries, it's brambles, it's debris, camps and whatnot on the property. This is ultimately going to make sure that water that runs in will be managed effectively, and we will provide a memo prior to a second reading that will show that. And B, the quality of the water should be higher than what is running under the Colwood Creek now. We understand there's significant environmental considerations as the water moves east, and we will do our best to address that and identify that prior to a second reading. With respect to the sewer comment from Councillor Parkinson, as Mr. Molnar has alluded, the challenge here will be the fact that we're not just aligning with between Colwood and Langford city staff. We're also dealing with a third party with respect to the CRD and with respect to West Shore Environmental or the Langford connection. We should be able to at least have a high level concept or intent ready for you with a comment from our engineering consultant prior to second reading. But as far as any kind of detailed plan goes, that might be a bit more of a tall order at this point. But if you're okay with a technical memo from, with concurrence from the different parties, I certainly would resolve to receive that before second reading.
Mayor Martin, you're okay? Okay, thank you. So on the amendment, and Councillor Parkinson, I'm just including the stormwater in this amendment to keep it clean. So I will call the question. Those that are opposed to the amendment? I'm not seeing any opposed. So the motion passes. I trust Councillor Parkinson, you were satisfied with Mr. Paultiel's explanation, or
Sure.
do you have an?
No, that's fine. I mean, again, I think the risk is largely on the developer. There is just a slight niggly concern about where Colwood sewer enters the CRD trunk, but I'm sure our staff can look after our interests there.
Great, thank you. So on the main motion, I'll go back to the list. I've got Councillors Day and then Parkinson. Cynthia.
Thank you. So the amenities, and it's probably a question for Brent, the amenities are tied to the height. So basically offering density bonusing for everything that's over 6 stories. And I'm just wondering, are we, does that where the bonus has to come in? Because I'm concerned that there may not be, there's no promises anyways in the report as to how many units would exist for dwellings in Colwood. And I'm just wondering if that was brought down to 4 stories instead of 6. Is that a possibility?
So Carrie or Brent?
Yep, through the chair. Thank you very much for the question, Councillor Day. Council or committee can suggest, we're kind of reaching outside the box. And the reason why we suggested 60 units as a starting point for that discussion was because the zone that we're proposing includes a 6-story kind of limit in the OCP. However, the zone that it started out with includes a 12-story limit in the official community plan. So what we did is we took that 6-story unit or 6-story intent that would be contained in the zone naturally, estimated the amount of units per floor at 10, and then did 6 by 10. Committee can reach beyond that and go and say 80 or 100 units if it wanted, or can reach below that number. What the idea is trying to establish some sort of baseline for that. And the developer, if committee did agree to carry forward the recommendation at the 6 by 10 by the amenity charge, if the developer only achieved 4 stories, there is no refund mechanism built into this. However, if the developer achieves 7 stories, they'd be paying anything more than the 6 times 10. And quite frankly, if they achieve 6 stories with more units than 10, that would also be subject to additional fees. So that's the sort of premise, but committee can go farther or go less if it chooses to.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm trying to read my notes here. So one of the concerns that I have with the development is that I'm not sure what Langford needs, but I know that Colwood has quite a few car dealerships already. So I'm not sure that that's something that, you know, is near and dear to our hearts. And I'd be far more interested in seeing something come forward. I noticed that everything in Langford must have commercial on the first floor. So I would like to see some commercial development on the Colwood portion as well. So perhaps the developer could answer as to what they envision the commercial development component to be in Colwood other than a car dealership.
Someone from the applicant wish to comment on that one?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's Jim Hartshorn. So for Councillor Day and all councillors, you need to understand or remember that this property does not have access except through Veterans Memorial in Colwood. The only access is from Veterans Memorial. Some members of council and staff will remember probably over the last 25 years, at least 5 applications on this property for redevelopment, and access off Veterans Memorial has always been the sticker. The Department of Highways have not let that happen. So going to Councillor Day's question, we only have a right in with the appropriate ramp and slow down ramp. There's not a right out of this property in Colwood, and we're not allowed to come back onto to Veterans. So we need to come off the right away, connect to other connections in Colwood to either Revelo or to Meaford to exit the property. And frankly, the property is long and skinny and difficult to develop. And that's why we've placed, if you look at Appendix 3 that your planner put forward to you, that's why we placed the property a development the way we did, which is a residential building on the south portion. Everyone would remember that's next to Lowe's, and the development of the car lot, car dealership, which is a new car dealership, it's not a used car dealership. A very prominent building to be proposed there. And that's how it works for simply the access. It's very difficult site to coordinate 3 levels of elevation, dramatic elevations from Meaford to the south part of the property, from Revelo, as well as from Veterans Memorial. It's a very tricky property.
Thank you. I do note, though, that there is lots of pedestrian traffic. There's a big sidewalk, and it is an area that I see lots of people using, lots of kids walking to school, etc. All right. My next question is, if it is approved, and I think this would be to Colwood staff, I would like to be assured that we won't have issues with cars on the boulevard or any of the some of the issues that we've had in the past. Is there any way that we're assured that that won't be an issue going forward?
Through the chair, I can answer that one to Councillor Day. No, it's very difficult for me to assure you of that. Veterans Memorial Parkway, which is a ministerial road, will offer no opportunity for people to park on the boulevard. It right now is a very, very busy thoroughfare by that property. Where we may see it impacting the boulevard would be within the Langford portions of Meaford Avenue. We may see it extend across the east side of Veterans Memorial Parkway. However, that parking and accessibility and relationship back across Veterans Memorial would likely be a greater obstacle. I don't foresee Colwood streets being negatively impacted by it, but it may affect some of the Langford portions of Boulevard on Millstream Frontage Road, Meaford Ave, and the surrounding streets. The access into the site will be private property.
Great, thank you. And my last thing is I know I try not to do this overly much, but I have an amendment to offer, and that is referred to in the report, just for staff to review our amenity charges, which our bylaws last updated in 2009. So I think it's very much due for a review. And I'd like to make that recommendation that staff brought forward.
Cynthia, would you mind if we had that as a separate motion after considering this? Is that okay?
Yeah. No problem.
Great. So I'll move on to Councillor Parkinson, and then it'll be Kobayashi.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my first thing was to ask Dean which one of the options he had moved. So it sounds like we've decided he moved option 1, and I'll certainly support Cynthia's amendment to direct staff to review the community amenity charges. Essentially, I'm in support of this project. I think new car dealerships are a vast difference from some of the used car dealerships we've seen over the years. So it would be nice if it was all plunked on Colwood property and when we got ginormous tax benefits out of it. But hopefully we will get some tax benefits. The thing that I saw that I picked up on in the report tonight and hadn't when I was reading it earlier is the little slivers of land on, I guess that's the west side of VMP, and just what the plan would be for those, what they're good for, if anything, and if maybe now's the time to tidy them up in some fashion. I wonder if I get some comments on that.
Who wants to comment on that, sucker? Carrie, see your hand. Carrie?
Hi.
There you are.
Okay, good. Just to comment on, through the chair, these two parcels of property on the opposite, so each side of VMP were subdivided and were part of when VMP went through. So they are sort of remainders. At this time, this project will not be considering that. So I think perhaps the developer can come forward and offer some insight to those properties.
I hear Councillor Seaton would like a dog park there, maybe.
Thanks for passing the hot potato, Ms. Clark, off to the applicant. No, we to be honest, they're very it's an awkward strip of land, and the fact is that the because you have the high pressure CRD water main running in sewer main, pardon me, running under a portion of that. It's from a development perspective, the lands do not have a significant amount of utility. That being said, we're happy to discuss with council or city staff about use and intent for those lands. You know, being along the road, the school district and others, there may be some utility from a community perspective, but at this point we have no plans for that. And as Ms. Clark mentioned, it is not a portion for the MUE zone. We will not be putting a narrow building there or anything of that nature.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do plan to support this this application and to support the motion. All my issues have been addressed or will be addressed, so I feel satisfied with it. I look at it from this perspective also. It's just an odd piece of land. I was faintly aware that we owned, I think in a tour at the beginning of our terms, someone, I think it was Brent, that pointed out that something back there belonged to us, and yeah. Actually having had a good look at it right now, I went, wow, this is interesting. I mean, it's just it's a very non-usable piece of land, so it makes sense to combine this. And so I am going to be supportive of it because the tax revenue alone is we're going to get something of value for our citizens. The second point I want to make is, and I'm going to ask for your advice on this or staff, but I think that from a 30,000 foot point of view, and maybe it requires another motion outside this one, but what I think that's required is, like, this doesn't even make sense that this is Colwood. And I know Langford owns a piece of land down by Kelly and VMP that is Langford's, and it's actually sort of in our boundary, but it's not ours, it's Langford's. So as a motion separately from this, I want to make sure I want to decouple this, because I don't think they have the time nor the energy to look into different options of, is there a possibility in the future for land swapping here? So that's my comments. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Brent, I see your hand up.
I want to thank Councillor, through the chair, I want to thank Councillor Kobayashi for mentioning that. A land swap has been initially looked at in here. It takes a formal boundary adjustment, and in our previous discussions internally, and even including portions with Langford, we thought that we would look at other areas and include it as one consideration, because it takes a fair bit of time and electoral decision as well. It may include areas of Jacklin Road, for example, as well. Those discussions have only started in their preliminary stage. However, if there is a recommendation coming from this committee for council consideration, it will certainly give us marching orders to move on with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before they call the question, I just want to acknowledge the amount of work that staff has done to get to this point, both on the Colwood side and Langford side. And it's a bit unusual. 99.9% of Colwood residents don't realize that this chunk is in Colwood, and the impact is totally on Langford. So I do appreciate the upfront payment as well, which is a bit unique. And with that, I will call the question. Those that are opposed to the recommendation? One opposed, Councillor Day. And so the recommendation passes. Now, Councillor Day, you had a motion to review the fees?
Yes, sorry, I'm just Trying to find that spot in my report that has it on there. Of course, my fingers won't work.
Cynthia, here, I
Almost.
got it here. How about
Okay,
direct staff to review and update the community amenity contributions and attainable housing policies and return with report in fall 2020.
perfect.
I think that's what you meant to say.
That is.
Perfect. So we have a motion on the floor. I don't see any discussion. So those that are opposed, don't see any opposed. So the motion passes. All right. Councillor Kobayashi, you did have your hand up and then down. You want it up? Okay. Doug.
Okay, thank you very much. So just continuing on now that I want to decouple this now, but as per staff, per what our Director of Development Services, Engineering Development Services, I think it is, I would like to make a motion that staff come back to council with options as far as potential land swaps for the future. This takes a long time, I do realize that, but it'd be great to see those options. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the floor. Councillor Baxter? Oh, unmute. Please, sorry, I forgot to remind you.
Right. I have some background in this potential land swap going back years, and I would be opposing this motion simply because the piece of land that is the opposite side of VMP down near Kelly Road that would be part of the swap is, in my belief, completely unbuildable. Nothing can be constructed there. And we would be swapping a piece of land that probably has an extremely low tax rate for a piece of land that will have a much higher tax rate. And I can't see where we win.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson?
Sorry, hit the wrong button. Yeah, I'm going to support this motion just because I think we should always be thinking about stuff like this and tidying up remnants of things gone by. I would like to I'd like to tag it with a very low priority. I don't think it has really any effect on what we're doing on this site today. We couldn't stall these guys while we went through some navel gazing and provincially, politically, bureaucratic, slow process to sort of tidy things up. But you know, I mean, if we had on the corner of our desk a list of boundary changes that might make some sense, no harm in knowing that or even discussing them. So I'll support this.
Councillor Jansen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and much along the same lines as Councillor Parkinson, not specific to this chunk at Kelly Road, I have heard has been historically discussed, but I'm just not aware of any other locations because there might be some viability in some other locations, and I again would love to hear some feedback from staff on that.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Martin?
Thank you. I'm never hesitant to gather more information. It helps me make better decisions. But I, through the chair to staff, 2 questions in regards to this motion. Can you tell me what a financial consequence to this motion, if this motion passed, would have on our budget? And also, how does that affect our short-term and long-term agendas?
Yeah, through there, we started looking at that. Sorry, were you calling on Mr. Robert Earl?
Yeah, I see Robert's hand up.
Fine,
Maybe I'll- Robert, did you want to take a crack at it first?
Thank you, Chair Logan. Given the commentary and given the strategic priorities that Council has already discussed for this year and the following 3, it would be my perspective that we could do preliminary work with a delivery date in the first quarter of 2021 internally with no impact on budget. If Council wanted it faster than that, we would need to return with an approximate cost of what that might entail, as we would have to contract that work out.
Okay. And Councillor Day?
Thank you. I really, I don't want to discourage the thought process, because I think that's it's really good to think about everything that's available to us. But I am familiar with both the remainder parcel and the other parcel that's being talked about here. And I do understand some of the constraints. So I think that this process might be better as part of a visioning process with all of council sitting down with staff, talking about what are our strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities for our land base pretty much holistically, and talk about, you know, what things we got to watch out for, and what things we want for the future of Colwood. So I just think it might be better as a workshop item than as something coming forward as a land swap option without, you know, I don't want to take up too much time, but there's lots of information, and it is a riparian area and a lot of other issues and history involved in that particular site. So at this moment, I am not feeling comfortable to vote for this to go forward for two reasons. One, that I think we need to think about the big picture altogether. And two, I think that we need to stay strategic with our staff resources and not get caught up in the little stuff too much. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug, I do see your hand up. Did you have something new to add, or?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that everyone is very crystal clear on this. I thought I made it very clear in the beginning. I didn't consider this a high priority, but it's interesting to see what the potential other options are for us. I mean, maybe we could have had more of an Olympic view. I don't know. I'm not saying that specific area. I just gave that as an example because I mean, I looked on the map and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. But, you know, I'm just saying that options, and I'd be quite satisfied if staff said Q2 next year. That's fine. At least we have the options on the table. Anyways, that's all I wanted to motivate.
Great, thank you. So I will call the question on the motion that's on the floor. I think we're all clear on the motion. And so those that are opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, I see two opposed, Councillors Day and Baxter. So the motion passes. So we will go to, thank you very much, Carrie and Brent, on that one. So we will go to the next item. Let me go here. Landmark Development Variance Permit Application DVP 20-001 for 468 Goldstream. So I'll invite Richard Buchan, our planning technician, to introduce the item. Richard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
We can.
Perfect. So this is a development variance permit application for 468 Goldstream Avenue. They obtained development permits in 2018, but are looking to make some reconfigurations on sites to building height and parking areas. This would require some variances to council. One variance is to change the maximum building height from 8 stories to 9 stories. The other is to eliminate a 1 meter landscape buffer along the western property line to 0 meters to accommodate parking ramps. The general purpose of these variances are to eliminate portions of the underground parking from encroaching onto this parcel that will be dedicated as park to the city as part of the rezoning. I'm here for questions if you have them.
Great, thank you very much. And I note Councillor Day had a series of questions to staff earlier, and so thank you to Richard and Brent who answered those pretty promptly. Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know it was written in the staff report, but if Richard can just go through the Cheese House, where it fits into this development, the timeline for the Cheese House and the remediation or the moving of it, and how all that fits in with this development.
Richard, do you have a cheesy answer?
So if we go to, I'm just pulling up the appendix in the reports, my apologies. If we go to Appendix 2, Appendix 4, you'll see that there's an area in blue highlighted towards the front of the property, as well as a little box area. That is where the cheese house is proposed to be relocated. They have a heritage professional who will be supervising and monitoring that. And as per the conditions of rezoning, the first building permit will have to be for that to be moved.
Okay, so timing wise, it happens. I guess my concern is always this. The numbered company puts up a building, disappears into the ether, and we're left with a cheese house caught holding the bag here. Like, at what point does this happen? Is this at the front end, or
first building?
You know,
we'll have to.
I'm still waiting for the Colwood Corners pub to be reestablished and opened up again.
Yep, for clarity, it's the front end. So the first building permit will have to be to relocate to that cheese house. They would not be able to put up an apartment building first and then leave the cheese house where it is.
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Richard.
So we won't be left holding the cheesecloth is what Richard's saying. So Councillor Day.
Thank you. And thank you very much for the answers to my many questions earlier. Where am I going with this? Oh, I know where I'm going. The ramps for the underground parking structure in this proposal have been moved so that the underground parking structure doesn't run into the park dedication. But I'm wondering, one of the consequences for moving those ramps is the loss of any setback for the existing neighbors. So instead of getting a 3-meter landscaped area between them and the cars, they're getting no buffer whatsoever. It's right to the very edge of the property. So is it possible to move that ramp more inboard so that cars aren't basically driving right on the property line for those residents who still live in the existing homes? And if it were possible, what would the compromise be?
Richard?
Through the chair, I believe that would be a question for the applicant's architect, which we're happy to follow up with and get some answers before council considers this. I don't know what the impacts would be on moving that. That may be very challenging or it may be very simple. I'll have to follow up with the applicant's architect, and I'm happy to do so.
Okay, thank you. And there's the same issue on the other side. It's also for the parking ramp that where the setbacks have been reduced to 0. So I will leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Cynthia. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, as with Councillor Day, I worry about those 0 setbacks and parkade ramps right on the property line. I'm not at all sure why that's necessary. It would seem that's the point of having setbacks, is so things like that don't happen. So I would look forward to some more information from planning staff on that. I would also like to know, I believe that the cheese factory or the cheese house, whatever it is, was proposed to be moved, and I don't have the details right. It was proposed to be taken apart and moved, and then later somebody came along and said, well, that's probably not the right way to do it. Maybe you should move it all at once. I may have that reversed. I may be completely wrong. I guess now that we have a Heritage Commission up and running, I guess I would like to make sure that it's going to get moved properly if we're going to go to the trouble of moving it. And just as an aside, the concept of creating a bunch of problems so that the parkade doesn't sit underneath a park doesn't bother me too much. If we had a park on top of a parkade, I don't see why that would matter. It'd be green space, it would be park. we'd mow it. Probably not the end of the world. So if that was what it took to make the project worth, I would certainly consider that. And then lastly, we had a last minute letter from, I forget, I don't have the name in front of me, but it talked about a stands of very nice trees along the property line, apparently the property line between Colwood and Langford. And I'm just wondering if I could ask staff what the potential is to save those trees.
Richard?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, yeah.
Perfect. The tree preservation and protection, as well as dealing with the creek in the rear of the property, was all done under the 2018 development permits. We have a letter from the project arborist who's noted that the proposed alterations to the site will not result in any more removal of trees. I would have to look at the specific trees in question, but either they're ones that would be protected under that 2018 permit, or they're ones that were already approved to come out under the 2018 permit.
And you could provide that information before we see this again?
Happy to go get that information.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. And Stuart, Mayor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to move the staff recommendation, which would be to recommend to council that DBP 20001 be authorized for assurance. But I do have a question as well. I guess the first question I have, and I guess it's the same question, is in the recommendation that I've just moved, it talks about the relaxation of section 10.24.5 of the Colwood Land Use Bylaw to increase the maximum height of building A to 9 stories from 8 stories. But then, under 4, discussion, the second paragraph, the official community plan uses designations of the subject property Colwood Corners, which is envisioned to accommodate the city's greatest residential and commercial intensities, ranging from 12 to 15 stories. And I guess the question, the first question to staff is, I'm just trying to understand if this fits into the Colwood Corner zoning, which has an aspirational desire to go from 12 to 15 stories. Why is this before us if it already fits the zoning? Then that's just a technical question because I don't understand it. The second issue is how do we inspire our developing community to meet what our OCP is desiring? And if our OCP is desiring for 12 to 15 stories, and developers are coming in below that, how do we actually maximize out what we want in our OCP?
Thank you, and through the chair. The zone speaks to 8 stories. The OCP designation speaks to 12 to 15. The OCP is aspirational, whereas the zone is what is currently permitted. So this is before council because they're looking to get 9 stories as opposed to the 8 stories that they're currently permitted. But as you've pointed out, they are underperforming in terms of the maximum height and the maximum floor area ratio that they could achieve under the OCP designation. This property was rezoned prior to the current OCP. For future applications that come forward on other lands, we do refer applicants to the current OCP and the aspirational targets in terms of height and floor area. In terms of strategies and tactics to try and get people to the maximum as opposed to getting something below, that's something that staff would have to look into and follow up with, but also happy to do that depending on workload here.
Thank you, Brent, and then I'll call the question.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, just to add to what Richard said, sometimes it's just simple performance in terms of cost benefit, and perhaps it's going to deeper levels of underground parking, which cause different structural components and different costs of the parking structures. And sometimes those are the decisions that we're not aware of the escalating cost. It may be that case in here. They're already going 1 layer of underground, perhaps going to a higher required a second level, which would be whole different structural components to the design.
Councillor Parkinson, do you have something new to add, or can I call the question?
Well, I was just going to suggest that I would vote against the recommendation since we have already a couple of requests for more information before we deal with this on the existing trees and the setbacks for the parkade entrances. So The way the motion reads now is that the DVP would be authorized, and that information, whether we got it or not, would make no difference.
Thank you. So with that, I will call the question. Those that are opposed to the motion, please raise your hands.
Sorry,
Oh.
can I have an amendment?
Okay. Sorry.
It's not-
Oh, can I just go to Robert first, Cynthia, and then
Sure.
you might have a comment there. CAO.
Thank you, Chair Logan. Sorry, I was trying to catch you before you called the question. As we're at Committee of the Whole, if council was desirous of receiving additional information, you could move this project forward subject to that information coming when it hit council's table. At that point, then council could consider committee's recommendation together with the additional information you required.
Thank you.
Exactly. That's my motion.
Okay, so we have an amendment, a brief amendment on the table. So I'll call the question. Those who are opposed to the amendments? Mayor Martin?
Right, I have a discussion on that. Sorry.
Okay,
So can staff please explain, will there be a delay then? If this motion passes, do we still anticipate the same timeline, or do we anticipate that it will be a slower timeline?
Robert?
Thank you. Endeavor to get the information as fast as possible so as to not have a negative impact on timing.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands up, so I will call the question on the amendment. Those that are opposed to the amendment? Don't see any opposed, so the amendment passes. On the main motion as amended, those that are opposed? Seeing none opposed, one opposed, Councillor Day. The motion passes. That's it for tonight's agenda. So the next meeting is scheduled for Monday, June the 15th. So I will look for a motion to adjourn, please. And it's moved by Councillor Kobayashi. All those in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you.
Good job, everybody.